Hey, Josh, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, glad to be back.
All right, so we're wrapping up our series on pay-per-click, specifically Google Ads, formerly known as Google AdWords. And this episode, we're going to be talking about the how. You want to explain what exactly that means?
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that we covered some basic best practices for looking at a Google Ads account and effectively managing it, and then looking at some of the KPIs that we measure results based off of. It might be different than what a lot of other people look at when they look at or think about Google Ads.
So that's like sharing the secret sauce, right? Like the recipe?
Kind of, it's pretty secret, but ketchup is always the base.
All right, ketchup is always a bit. Well, let's shut this thing down. We'll have to end the episode right now because Josh isn't allowed to share those details. Instead, we'll read a story from FlippingJunkie's 7 Crazy Stories, which was something that I published in 2011. And of course, I'm kidding. I'll read that story, but then we'll get into the details that Josh really wants to tell everybody about. And let's see. So this story real quick is of cats and hamburgers, okay? Just to lighten the mood a little bit, being that we're going to be getting into like KPIs and numbers. And some people, love to hear about that stuff, and other people kind of like, it gives them a headache. So let's start with the story first, and hopefully that'll brighten your mood so that you can listen to the number stuff. I don't know if I even make sense with all that. Anyway, so this is how the story goes. Early on in my investing career, I got a call from a seller that wanted to sell a house he lived in. I was driving with my wife when he called, and we happened to be close by, so we agreed to meet at the house immediately, as he seemed like he was pretty darn motivated. So the house seemed like the typical neglected homestead of a motivated seller. Overgrown lawn, old roof, peeling paint, broken windows, and just an overall appearance of neglect. As we arrived at the front porch, I cautiously rapped on the front door. Did not want it to break apart as it seemed frail. It was like all split and everything. So the door creaked open with the weight of my knocking, and we were knocked over by a wall of extreme stench that escaped out of the crack of the door opening. I've since experienced some very raunchy smelling houses, but this one still takes the cake in my mind. Melissa mentioned that she would just stay outside because she didn't want to go inside of what that smelled like. So within a few seconds, the owner opened the door fully and invited me in. The horrible stench was burning my throat and chest and making me nauseous. The house was soggy and dank from the ceiling leaking for so many years. The walls were covered in dark yellow from years of heavy smoking. There were dozens of cats in this roughly 1,000 square foot house, and it smelled as if they'd been using the whole place as a litter box for a very long time. I couldn't tell if the floor was covered in feces or not, as there was so much of the fallen sheetrock and insulation and all manner of other things covering it. So the owner led me into the kitchen where he was busy cooking a hamburger, which just added to the nausea. While he was cooking this said hamburger, several cats walked over the stove and jumped over, and I think even stepped into this cooking hamburger. He picked up the patty, slapped it on 2 buns, and started munching down. He offered me a burger as well, and I turned it down. Oh, I was trying my best not to vomit, and he was eating his lunch. So as we walked through the house and he led me into a room that had about 3 padlocks securing it, he wouldn't show me that room. I was curious about it and made me extra cautious. I held my mag light flashlight in a tight grip, ready to strike if I had to. So the house would probably sell for $130,000, and this was obviously 8 years ago after repairs, and I figured I need to get it in the 30s to make it worth my while. So the seller wouldn't have it, followed up with him religiously for over 2 years and never bought the house. But anyway, so that's the story of this nasty, crazy stink with Otis was his name, Crazy Otis. If you're listening to this, God bless you. But so anyway, to lighten the mood a little bit there.
He didn't offer you a hamburger or whatever?
Yeah, he did offer me a hamburger.
You should have accepted.
I should have accepted it, but there's no way I was going to eat it.
Yeah, that extra cat stuff just might have been the seasoning that it needs to get to that next level.
I didn't want to get to the next level. That stink was putting me at the next level. All right.
Oh, so how to follow that? We're going to talk about some of the best practices for managing an account. And these are based off of like how we manage with our service here. So I definitely put a lot of stock in how effective this stuff is. Number one is monitoring the account as often as possible. So if you can stay on top of your Google Ads account at a daily level, you can identify a lot of trends that might be easy to miss if you just look at it at a weekly level. For example, you might test out some new keywords or ads, and on a day-to-day level, you can see that they're becoming increasingly successful. The opposite side of that is you might insert some new keywords into your account and daily see that they're eating up the majority of your ad spend. So if you're only looking inside of your Google Ads account once a week, a mistake like that can be $1,000 or $2,000 mistake.
Or more.
Yeah, or
like 2 weeks like I did.
So stuff like that can generally, it can definitely happen. But if you stay on top of it, generally you can negate a lot of that. Number two, choosing the right bidding strategy. So we manually bid keywords here because we're staying on top of them daily. And what we found is that a lot of Google's automated bidding strategies, they'll work for a certain period, but because Google Ads doesn't understand intent or motivation the way that we do, those strategies can lead to a lot of retail-based leads coming in, because the way that the account is set to grow based off of like clicks or impressions or whatever bidding model it is that you're using. The majority of those are going to come from people who are looking just to sell a house, especially when you're just getting started with Google Ads. And so that can actually turn your Google Ads account that's supposed to be geared towards motivated sellers into just motivated sellers looking to sell their house for full value. And that's going to be a huge waste of budget just because the bidding strategy was wrong. You have to be as specific with targeting as possible, as often as possible. So new investors or investors in new markets, you might find it best to target an entire area and then eliminate different zip codes inside of that area based off of performance. That's fine. That's one of the strategies that we use when we're getting started with new customers. If they don't know their markets at the zip code level, we'll start with a blanket area and then eliminate areas that they don't want to work in. And that's based off of clicks that are coming in, which are all associated with cost, but it's also based off of conversions that are coming in too. And that's part of that lead feedback loop that's important to have and to understand when you're managing a Google Ads account, is that if you can tie the motivations or the outcomes of leads to keywords and then search phrases that were used to find those ads, then you can work towards creating an account that's very surgical and very precise. We also start things off the opposite way too, where we'll start off with a very specific targeted zip code list and then expand based off of zip code later. But as often as possible, you want to be as specific as possible, because within Google Ads, you can make sure that you only spend your marketing dollar in the areas that mean the most to you. And when you're getting started, if you can get and stay as specific as possible, it's going to benefit you way more in the long run. But ultimately, where we strive to get everybody to is to the zip code level, whether we're starting out big and getting smaller or starting out small and then scaling up from there.
Oh, nice. Seems like a good strategy. And I would venture to say most people aren't really doing that.
Yeah, and if they're not, it's mainly just because they don't invest the time to understand their markets that well. Like, they'll know that a specific side of town generates a lot of leads for them, or specific neighborhoods, but you can actually nail a lot of this down to the zip code level and only spend money in those places where the homes are the best fit for you. And then ad extensions are something that are often overlooked also. And that's also one of those things that affects your ad rank. It's called ad format. So your ad extensions, they they add extra length to your ads, which is, it's all good information. So you can put links to your website. You can do call outs, which are just little snippets and phrases that provide more information about your business and why it's unique. You can add a phone number on there too. And there's even a text feature that you can add to your ad so that people can just tap on it and then text you directly to get in touch. But those ad extensions are something that people might use one or two of, when really there's 6 or 7 that are applicable to real estate investors that aren't getting used. So you have to use those, and you have to build out that ad and flesh it out as much as possible so that you set yourself apart from your competition, but you also work to build that ad relevance that's going to help your ad rank and make your clicks cheaper over time.
Nice. So those are the different, best practices for managing the account then. Just to go back over to summarize that. So you're saying monitor as often as possible, right? So dailies is really recommended because this is something that's costing you money. And if you can catch something that's producing these unmotivated seller leads that are costing you money, you can nip that in the bud sooner than later. Now, don't you have don't you have to be cautious though, that to not jump to conclusions too fast with not enough data?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are things like letting ads run for a while before you decide to pause them or rewrite them. But at the keyword level, if you are looking at the phrases that people are typing in order to find your ads, and looking at how much those clicks are costing you daily, it's pretty easy to tell if a new keyword idea is going to be something that you should run with or that you should pause. Something like an ad, if it doesn't get served within, a 5-day period, it's pretty safe to say that you can pause that ad and just write a different variation of a better performing ad to take its place. But the daily management, you have to jump in there and you have to look over all aspects of your account daily. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to make drastic changes daily, but you need to be aware of what's going on in there so that you can identify trends and start to see what the changes you're making are affecting inside of that account.
Nice. Okay, so I was trying to summarize, and then I asked the in-depth question right in the middle of summarizing it, which came up. But anyway, yeah, I felt like that needed to be answered though. Choosing the right bidding strategy and being specific with targets as possible, doing that down to the zip code level if you can, which I think is a brilliant idea. And then making sure you're using all of those ad extensions that are available to you to make that ad bigger and stand out more and get more clicks and get more usability and accessibility for people. So as we move on in this episode, what are some of the useful KPIs that you should be keeping track of when managing these accounts?
So there are a lot of different ones, but when we're looking at staying focused with performance-based results, not just like pumping up numbers, there are a few that kind of stand out that we found are kind of different that a lot of people might not know about. So for example, a lot of people who are running Google Ads but don't necessarily understand the importance of the numbers behind it might be looking at the total number of clicks and their cost per click, and then the number of conversions. Of those three, number of conversions though is really the one to look at. Clicks, you can't force more people to search and click on an ad than are out there looking for the service in total. And your cost per click is going to fluctuate based off of how you manage that account. So if you set a goal for something like cost per click, all you're going to be doing is limiting how your account can perform. Let's say you have a goal of a $20 cost per click, but every keyword that you have has a position number 1 spot of like $50. Well, you're probably not going to make it to the top of the page or be very visible at all, because you're not being competitive with those clicks. You're not bidding high enough in order to make a difference or make a dent in your market. So having like a lower cost per click goal is fine, but it's not going to be effective in the long run. So 3 big things that we look at that I think are pretty different. Number 1 is click-through rate. So your click-through rate, that's one of those things we talked about before with ad rank in one of the previous episodes. That is the total number of impressions compared to the number of clicks that came in. So if you look at your account and you see that your click-through rate is getting lower and lower over time, that means that your ad copy is not as appealing as it was when it started. Or people might be getting ad fatigue, they might be searching for something else, and so your ads are less relevant now. But a low click-through rate means that the message in your ads is not as concise or not as good as it should be. To give a general idea of a good click-through rate, if you're somebody like Nike, who's marketing a lot of different products and running a big ad strategy, you might have a click-through rate of 0.65%, but that's still millions of people clicking over to your website because you're a big brand. Now, for a lot of smaller brands and just local businesses in general, Google points towards 1% being the benchmark to hit for a good click-through rate. So if you have a 1% click-through rate, your ads are doing good in your market.
Oh, nice.
Because of how specific real estate investing is, we set our goals a little bit higher. We aim for 2% and above to start, because those keywords in our clientele are so specific that we know the traffic's going to be limited, and there's only so many variations of ads that you can write before you start to nail down a message and you run with that. So 2% above is our goal. Obviously, smaller, more specific markets where the service is much needed, you could see a click-through rate as high as 10 or 12%.
Nice.
In larger markets, you might have a 1.5% click-through rate, but that's still a ton of people clicking over to your website.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to bear in mind. 1% is kind of that benchmark that everybody should strive for, but the more specific your market is, the higher you should expect that to go.
Yeah, that's awesome to share those kinds of numbers, because a lot of times I think that's the thing that is really scary for people, is they just don't know what numbers show that they're doing well or not, right? Like, I know I got this number, but I don't know. To me, 1% seems like I'm failing, right? If you don't know what the benchmark is or what the standard is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people, when they first get started and we go over click-through rate, they wonder, shouldn't more people be clicking over to the website? But when we dive into that specific detail about what Google thinks is a successful campaign and then where we normally are, we're like 2 or 3 times better than what their benchmark is anyway.
Yeah, and I would think that even organic experiences the same thing, just most people don't know about it. Like your showed up organically in the results, but how many of those people actually click on any of the results instead of searching something different? So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably going to even be a lower overall click-through rate too, because of the amount of organic traffic that's hitting it. So the next thing we look at is conversion rate. And kind of the industry standard for a lot of different marketing for real estate investors is that 10% mark. So that's where everybody should strive to get to. That's where we try to keep customers at when we're getting started, is a 10% conversion rate. So 10% of the people who click over to the site should either complete a phone call or fill out a form. And that 10%, with the analogy we did with the $3,000 budget in the last episode, that would make that 1 out of 10 leads, it turns into a deal happen pretty quickly. So that's more or less what to shoot for, is 10%. Now, just like click-through rate, the longer that a campaign runs, the higher you should expect that to go, because you're refining your messaging on your ads. You're working on creating a better landing page that's a conversion monster. So that should go up over time also. I think we have some accounts that are sitting at like a 35% conversion rate.
Oh, nice.
In smaller markets, because that messaging is so well nailed down.
And just to clarify something, I think you had said something about the conversion rate 1 out of 10. And this gets into the place where conversion rate of 1 out of 10 is, so you're going to get 10 clicks likely onto your site where they click the ad. So 10 clicks on your ad over to your site. And then out of those 10, maybe one will actually call or submit the form to you. And then if you have a lead to deal rate, conversion rate of taking those leads, this is where it's on the investor, right? To answer the live call, go to the appointment quickly and close the deal, ends up being, if you're looking at maybe like 1 out of 10, but I think people will typically see, don't a lot of the investors actually see much lower or actually higher conversion rates of the number of leads that actually came in from Google ads to actual deals, like 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5.
Yeah, the longer that we run and manage campaigns, the lower that lead to deal ratio gets because of the level of refinement that goes into that account. They have some people that are just naturally great salesmen and great closers, and they can get started with a Google Ads account and they can start closing like 1 out of every 3 leads into a deal. But most investors who are getting started, and even a lot of the experienced ones, they don't operate at that level where they're closing that high. It's 1 to 10. That 10% is a good mark to strive for because it's such a big industry standard with a lot of other forms of marketing out there.
Okay.
But it turns out that it's a pretty good benchmark for like the everyman who's just getting started and doesn't have like a ton of sales experience or something. At least that 1 out of every 10, somewhere right there in that ballpark, leads that turns into a deal. That's a great place to strive for because that's definitely where I started out at, was 1 out of 10. And I've talked to a lot of other people that's their benchmark too.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to point that out because the ones that I remember when people saying they get 1 out of 3, so it's like the one that you kind of remember. But yeah, that might be the exception, and definitely something that's possible if you work to improve yours. But yeah, having the right expectations of the 1 out of 10 is good to know. Are there any other KPIs that are super important?
Yeah, so impression share is another big, huge one for us, and essentially what that is your online market share. So what percentage of total searches are you showing up for the keywords that are being run inside of your account? So you might have, let's say, 1,500 keywords inside of your account and a 50% impression share. Well, that means that you're only showing up for searches for all of those keywords combined half the time. And the goal that we shoot for with that to start is 80%. Because that's a huge market share. We're also using a much more specific keyword list though. We're down like underneath the 500 mark for keywords that we're using because we've weeded out what works and what doesn't work, separated them, and then build campaigns based off of that. And that it makes it easier to capitalize on a larger portion of that market because we're being so specific and so nailed down with what it is that we're running. So if you have just a ton of keywords in your account, thousands of keywords, you should expect a lower overall impression share because unless you have a lot of budget to cover all those broad match keywords, you're not going to show up for all those searches.
Yeah.
Specific you get though, with the right budget, you can capitalize on 100% of those searches that show much better motivation and much better intent.
Nice. Yeah. So the 3 were the click-through rate, conversion rate, and impression share are the main KPIs that you focus on.
Yeah, those are 3 of them. There's a handful more that get kind of more into the advanced workings of Google Ads, but these are things that everybody should be able to look at and comprehend. That click-through rate is how well your ads are doing. Your conversion rate is how well your page or your acquisitions person is converting. And your impression share is how much of that market space you're actually taking up. And if you pay attention to those 3 things and try and get them to those goal points that we mentioned, you're well on your way to having an account that is going to perform for you for the long run.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Instead of just telling people, here's 15 things you need to measure, like here's the ones that really matter, right? Like let's keep it simple. What really at the end of the day is what's going to show that you're actually producing the results you should be, and having those 3. So I love that. What about cost per click? Because I know a lot of people, when you talk about pay per click, people are talking about what's your cost per click or cost per lead, cost per deal. But cost per click is one that people kind of focus on. What do you think about measuring and looking at paying attention a lot to that one?
Yeah, that's the point that we touched on just a little bit earlier, was that cost per click is good to keep track of. And as you continue to manage your account effectively, you should see that cost per click go down over time without affecting your overall ad rank or your average position that you're showing up in. So measuring cost per click and having it as a KPI, it's not going to be that effective because it's going to continuously change over time, and you're going to need it to based off of how you're driving results. So if you want a low cost per click and you bid all of your keywords down, you might affect your ad rank where you're not even showing up at the top of the page. That means you're going to have a lot less results, a lot less people clicking over to your site, and you'll hit that lower cost, but you won't be getting the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, so it's adjusting the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't really let that be an indicator of how well your account is performing overall. You should look at it and be aware of it, but there are tons of other factors that are going to be affected by changing things inside of your account that are going to mess with that cost per click. So not really KPI material.
Nice. All right. So this is, the KPIs that you should be looking at. And obviously, like we said in the last episode, and again, this is a series of episodes. So if you are just tuning in to the podcast on this episode and you didn't hear the preceding one, start with 150, episode 150, more of a background on Josh and going through the what, the why, the when. And then this episode is the how. So check out those episodes. A lot of great information. Definitely wanted to break it up into smaller episodes. And, as we said in the last one, with Lead Propeller Fuel Service that you run and you operate for our account, our personal house flipping account, and then a lot of the top investors in the country, you provide those reports on a monthly basis and even have calls to, delve into what all those numbers mean and what's happening and have that conversation with everybody. So it's a very personalized experience. It's not a service that's kind of set up and kind of forgotten or only addressed if there's a major problem. This is daily management, right, of these accounts.
Yep, exactly. That's all the best practices that we mentioned in this episode, and then all of those KPIs. Those are big parts of what go into the management that we provide for fuel customers. And it all starts with jumping in there and looking at things daily. So that's a huge advantage that all of our customers get to take advantage of, is knowing that there's somebody that's going to be in those accounts hitting those touch points daily.
Awesome. And the name Lead Propeller Fuel, I want to explain it again because a lot of people don't know that services we've named Lead Propeller Fuel. And that's kind of from a conversation with Don Costa where he was talking about, well, the website, is for you set up to set you up credibility and trust and all that kind of stuff for you to be able to start generating some leads, and you can do some things with it. So that's to get the fire going. It's like kindling, it's getting the fire going. But if you really want to get that thing into a blaze, into a big fire, throw some fuel on it. And that's what services basically is. It's this online, driving this traffic quickly to get these greater deals that come from online, these inbound deals, which tend to be much better, and as we discussed in the previous episodes. Now, when we set out to create this series of episodes, you had said, hey, we've got room to bring on about 20 more people. And, obviously we recorded these and we're spacing them out over several weeks. So I can't even promise that there's any left as this episode gets published. But if you're interested in checking this out and see if there's anything left or any openings at all, how should anybody out there listening reach out to you to find out about that?
So definitely send me an email to josh@leadpropeller.com or tweet at leadpropeller, and I'll be able to get you some more information on either the service or the availability of it. If you're ready to get started or you have Google Ads specific questions, or even anything related to fuel specifically and getting started with that service, you can send those to services@leadpropeller.com, and that'll also go directly over to me so that we can open up a dialogue and start talking about how we can create a solution that's going to work best for you and your market, dive into some of the numbers, see what they look like, and see about getting you started.
Awesome. Do you have anything else to share as we close this final episode in the series out?
No, just that I hope a lot of people got a lot of value out of what it is that we've done with this short series. And if they have any ideas for other short series that we could do, just send us an email, the same emails, or tweet at Lead Propeller that I just mentioned, and maybe we could put something else together.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a great idea. I love this idea of really getting into depth into something like this, especially something that still works and people hear. Like I mentioned before, I've even said it and even did webinars on direct mail is dead, right? And it's not dead. It depends on how you use it and where you're using it and all that kind of stuff. And I've heard some people say PPC doesn't work anymore because there's so many people using it. And that's not true either. It's really, who do you have managing that is more of the deciding factor, and how well they're managing it as a deciding factor whether it's working or not. And so definitely we know a lot of top level investors across country, including ourselves, that are having lots of success with it. And so wanted to make sure that people don't think that that's not still a possibility. It still works, and it's going to work for a long time. All right, Josh, I think we're going to be signing out.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Signing off, right? Yeah, it was like a podcast supposed to say signing off. Not
signing hats.
I'm going to go ahead and log out. FlippingJunkie podcast, logging out. All right.